All right, let's do it. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about the 5-1, a little bit about the mechanics of setting it up, but a little bit more about some of the more nuanced aspects, how to maximize each rotation, some of your considerations for getting into those rotations. So a little more of an intermediate to advanced level than a true beginner. So I'm going to speak as if most of you have some familiarity running a 5-1 system and you understand some of the basics of it. And yeah, then we'll hope to level up a little bit here. So it's a little bit about me. You guys don't care about that too much, but I've experienced with a couple different national team programs with the USA women, been with the Canadian women and with the Canadian men. Now I'm coaching a professional league in South Korea. And the good thing about that is at all these levels, whether it's national team, professional, university, which I've coached at, juniors, which I've coached at, the principles of making these decisions are actually the same. Some of of course, the tactics and the players that you put into these systems are different. But the principles are going to apply whether you're coaching high school or whether you're coaching at professional level. Okay, so we're trying to answer these two things. Why would you choose a 5-1 over some of the other systems that are available? 6-2 being very common. But there's 4-2 systems, there's 6-3, there's 6-6, there's probably a few other number combinations that I don't even know about. But talk about why you run a 5-1, kind of the basics of what it looks like. And then I think probably the nuts and bolts we'll spend a lot of time on is how to adjust each rotation and what decisions you might use depending on the personnel of your team and team strengths and weaknesses. Okay, so first let's think about the why. I think these are the four main questions that I look at when I'm kind of deciding what system in general to run. So first one is if we're talking about a 5-1, that means we're running a system where we have one setter that stays in the game and is the primary setter the whole time. So I need to ask how many setters I have on my team. And you only have one setter. There you go. Then this is an easy webinar. Okay, you don't even have to listen to the rest of the why if you only have one setter on your team. And this is not uncommon. I find this pretty that sort of answer the most common for a varsity high school coach. It's not uncommon for a varsity high school coach. We only have one real varsity level setter on the team. Maybe you got a couple kids on JV who can play setter a little bit. You're hoping that they develop, but you might just have one setter who's by far and away the best setter in your program. And that makes a choice for you. And then what I would also ask all of you to think about is how many setters do you need to develop? So basically, are you the kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better term, the end stop of your program, or are you a feeder program yourself? So, for example, if you're a high school varsity coach, you probably don't necessarily consider yourself as like a pipeline to a college program, even though some of your players may go on to play in college. It's not necessarily part of your job description to, hey, I got to develop 4 different setters because the local college team is going to need 2 of them. That's not really how it works. But if you're the JV coach, I would never recommend a JV team running a 5-1 unless, and we'll touch on this a little bit better later, if you're going to use some sort of alternating 5-1 system. So I'll get to that in a second. But a JV team, in my opinion, you should be trying to develop more than one a setter in your program. You're giving the varsity program kind of more, kind of you're feeding into them better. You're giving them more options. You're giving the kids on your team a few more options of a pathway and to make that varsity team. And likewise for club volleyball. I'm really not a huge fan of club teams only having one main setter on the team. Actually, a while ago when I coached club, I did have a season or two where that kind of was the case, where I really just had one setter who was the setter for the whole time. And hey, maybe you have a kind of utility player or somebody who's kind of a libero / setter or outside hitter / setter. But I think for a club program, it's not the ideal. I think the ideal is to be training 2, maybe even 3 setters on your team, because that adds to the depth of your program. And club seasons are long. So if you're relying on a primary 5-1 and your 5-1 setter rolls an ankle, it not only kind of messes up, obviously, like the season for you, but like all the hitters on the team and stuff like that. So I'm really more of a fan of being able to have 2 or more setters on a club team. And Likewise, if you're a middle school coach, you're coaching in that 13s and 14s age range. I really like systems where you have at least two, if not three, and maybe in a later webinar we're going to get into the 6-2 or 6-3, 4-2 systems where you have more players setting. But I think for those levels for sure, because positions are they're not set yet, even if they have some main positions in 7th and 8th grade. I think giving some different players chances to set is pretty valuable. So this kind of feeds into the number two. 5-1 is less sub dependent than a 6-2. So that could be good or bad. Like I said, in club teams, there's plenty of club teams where a big part of your challenge as a coach is to get everybody playing time. And the reality is, when you run a 6-2, so your setters are subbing out for hitters, you can basically have 4 players playing that right side spot between the setter and the opposite position. You can have 4 players, 2 of them set, 2 of them subbing and hit. The 5-1, it's a maximum of 3. So even if, because your setter stays in the front row, so even if you DS out that opposite, you only have 3 players playing those 2 spots rather than 4. Now, like, this could be good or bad. Could be the less sub dependent of a 5-1 can be good if you don't have people to sub in that spot. Okay, there you go. You just run the 5-1. But if you have a thing where you're trying to find more playing time for people, 6-2 is a pretty good option. Even if that you have one setter who's a bit better, maybe she can also hit a little bit, or maybe if you're trying to get more people playing time, it's just kind of one of those deals. So you have to determine what your playing time policies are and how you need to kind of work that all out. Something to consider. Let me actually just kind of kick forward a little bit to that kind of thing, to this slide, because something I also want to think about is kind of this idea of something within the set or within the match. So if you have 2 setters on your team, say 2 players on the team, their position is going to be setter, and you want to get them relatively equal playing time. One option is you run a 6-2, so they both play within the set. Another option is that you run a 5-1, and one plays game 1 and one plays game 2. And I actually like that system quite a bit. I like it quite a bit for a JV team or for a club team, because it allows the players to get into the flow of the match and try to have the full set. They can really get into the rhythm of playing, and they're both learning how to play the setting position, front row and back row. So, for example, if you're a JV team and your varsity team, your varsity head coach prefers to run a 5-1, I think it's nice if your JV setters get a chance to play in a 5-1 system. But then, of course, you want to be developing 2 centers. And I think likewise also in the club world, this can be a good strategy too. There's plenty of club teams out there where their setters just never play front row, because the 6-2 is very popular at club volleyball because it gets more people more playing time. And I think then they're only learning a part of the position of setter, because part of the position of setter is learning how to set out the front row, learning how to set an offense where the setter's front row. We're going to talk about that in a second. So you can also kind of consider this idea of, hey, instead of playing half of set 1 and half of set 2, you're going to play all of set 1, and then you other player B, you're going to play all of set 2, and then hey, if it goes to 3, whoever won, hey, you get to stay in and play. That's usually how I do that. So something like that usually takes a little bit of explaining to the parents, because maybe it's a little harder for them to kind of understand. It's just a little less typical, but I find that usually we don't have a huge problem with that, and kids actually do like that. So as we get into, got to be able to score with front row center. So I mean, that's the most obvious thing. A 6-2, okay, you get 3 hitters. That's usually what people kind of say right away. Something I would actually consider: how much was that right side going to score anyway? So that's probably your 6th best hitter, if you think about it. If you're debating between a 5-1 and a 6-2, probably have your 5 best hitters. They're in some combination of outside, right side, and middle hitters that are already out there. So when you go to a 6-2, you're not putting in your 3rd best hitter, probably putting in your 6th best hitter. So how much was she going to score anyway? Now, then, if you don't run that 6-2, can your setter attack and score some points when they're in the front row? Can your middle run a slide? Can you hit effectively out of the back row? To me, that's and those 3 things there. That's kind of the increasing in order of performance as you get higher level. So setter attack is gonna probably outweigh the slide at 14 and under. But slide's going to get going a lot more at the high school varsity level, and then definitely at the NCAA level, hitting out of the back row. And by this, I mean more as like a true kind of in-system back row attack option, as opposed to just kind of a bailout where you're just trying to, kind of take a swing out of system. I mean, kind of a real effective, high efficiency attack out of the back row. Atypical in high school, and a little bit more common for boys for sure. And then as you get into the college level, yeah, definitely collegiate men hit well out of the back row. Some of the higher level collegiate women's teams hit effectively out of the back row, and then you see out of the professional level. Back row attack at the high school level can be effective when you have one hitter who's just by far and away the best attacker on your team. So even though she's going to be less effective out of the back row than she is in the front row, trade-off might still be worth it. But basically, just having a plan for scoring with the front row center. And the only thing is, I would definitely not make the assumption, if you're coaching high school, if you're coaching club level volleyball, that you're actually worse with that front row center. Because if that right side is not a particularly strong player and your setter can attack a little bit, setter attack is real effective. It's actually effective at all levels. I feel like setters generally attack at a high efficiency, but definitely at the high school and club level, that setter attack can be very effective. And just being the setter, being able to clean up the net a little bit. A lot of high school club setters, if you're talking 5'7", 5'8", even, which is decent size for a high school setter, you're probably not elevating above the net to save balls with a jump set and cleanly run your offense. Those are difficult tasks, and a lot of times, if that setter's front row, they can bail out some of these mediocre kind of tight passes by keeping that ball in play. So that's something to think about. So even at the NCAA level, see about 0.5% or less typically between 2 hitter and 3 hitter rotations, all on average. So this doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be the case for your team or every team. There are absolutely teams that struggle in 2 hitter rotations, especially in certain 2 hitter rotations. So I don't want to say that is a blanket statement. I'm just saying don't automatically assume that you're really losing a lot offensively when your setter is front row if you have some kind of plan for it. And then kind of you have this continuity versus complexity task. This is classic. People say this a lot. Hey, one of the advantages of a setter is that it's the same. 5-1 is that it's going to be the same setter the whole time. There's a kind of a continuity, a flow to that. It's kind of hard to define that statistically. So this is one of those things where it's a little bit more nebulous realm. I do buy into it a little bit. I do find the continuity of that 5-1 setter is valuable. I find it valuable for the teammates, but I also just find it valuable for the players themselves. I find a lot of times just letting players get into that rhythm is helpful. But then there's also this kind of complexity task, because when a 5-1, we have to run 6 different rotations. Setter 4 is a particularly challenging one. Setter 3, setter 2, they're a bit easier. Those pretty easy rotations to learn. But setter 4 is a challenging rotation for a lot of high school juniors teams. So when you're at 6-2, you only have to learn 3 different rotations, and then you just repeat them. So there's not a clear answer there. So just kind of that's something for you to weigh. Continuity versus complexity there. All right. So let's get into what does it look like. And I'm starting with setter 6 because, and I'll use both of these. So setter 6 is often called rotation 2. If rotation 1 is setter 1, rotation 2 is your next rotation with the setter in 6. And I'm starting with this for a reason. When I introduce rotations to a team in the first year, I almost always start with setter 6. And that's because in setter 1, your outside is playing right side and your opposite is playing on the outside. And I find it is a little like confusing. Doesn't really make a big difference for more advanced players. But if you have players that are like a little bit more beginner and you tell them, okay, your position is right side hitter, but except for the first rotation, now you're going to start the game and playing outside. It's like, what? Wait, what? So I don't know what about it, but I often just like to start with setter 6. So here you see our USA women's national team. That's pretty typical rotation 6, where you say kind of the setter is pushing up the opposite to some degree. Often they still like to stand a bit off the net so that opposite can get into her right side pattern. And then you see the middle. She's standing over there on the right side of the court, kind of out of the way of the serve receiver. She's going to watch the pass and then usually enter in loop around to the center of the court to attack. You got a back or outside. In all of these situations, I'm going to show, except for one exception, I'm going to show the libero in for the middle because that's by far the most common. It's not the rule. You can do it otherwise, but it's definitely the most common. So I'll kind of show there and then talk about some of the variabilities for that. Okay, then you got setter 5, rotation 3. And so now that libero has the middle here. That's Jacko, number 24. She's going to come to the back row. And then libero's in for her now. And then they got a new middle there over on the left side of the court. So where setter 6, you're kind of going right to left with where the players are stacked up. Now in setter 5, they're going from left to right. And you see that setter there. She's trying to get over a little further into the center of the court, trying not to be in the way of that outside hitter, number 23, that back row outside hitter. But the setter is trying to get over there a little further. And this is, if you're not doing this is important to teach your players how to do that, because sometimes in this rotation, the setters, stay too far to the left of the court because they're worried about the overlaps. And I know USA Volleyball has some good content about the specific overlap rules. So we won't get as much into that, just with the general principle of you want to steal some space there, and that overlap, they get over there a little faster. It's a little bit better. This is usually an effective rotation for a lot of teams. The hitter entries are real easy. That left to right entry for the middle is often a pretty easy one. Opposite's already over there. She can fully get into her approach. This is a nice rotation for a lot of teams. Setter 4 is a challenging rotation for a lot of teams. So if you're running a 5-1, you need to spend a good amount of time training this rotation. It's challenging because often that setter is, you can see she's kind of pinned way over there on the court because those middles, the middle needs to kind of stay in her rotational order, and setter's got to stay on the left side of her. So it's worth it to spend a lot of time figuring out how you're going to stack it up and try to steal a few inches, a few feet at a time. It's actually one of these situations where it's actually harder for high school players because it's kind of weird. In high school, the overlap rules are often reffed much more strictly than in professional volleyball. Professional volleyball, they often allow full step overlap for those releases. They will rarely call a setter unless the overlaps are egregious, and even the middles, they'll let them get into their release a little early. But then you get these high school refs that if you're overlapped by 2 inches, they're calling you. So the first thing is like you want to try to push those overlaps as far as you can. And then second of all, you got to train them in practice is the real important one. So if you look typical in high school volleyball, setter 1 and setter 4 are on average the 2 worst side out rotations. And they're the two, part of the reason is they have the 2 most challenging releases for the setters. So this is an important one. And if you go to a 5-1, having a plan for rotation 4, and then we're going to talk about some of the ways that you can adjust it a little bit as well. Okay, setter 3, this is usually a pretty easy one. Now the setter's there. She can kind of almost stand wherever she wants. Middle's over on the right side of the court. And we'll talk about in the adjustment section. There's actually a pretty good amount of freedom that you can do with that middle and where you want to send her. And in this case, USA is playing with a non-passing opposite. So you see that opposite is pushed out of serve receive. She's not going to receive the serve. So she's just kind of hanging out back there waiting to attack. You may use your opposite as a passer. That could be a DS. It's not uncommon in club volleyball, like we talked about. There's a front row right side hitter and a back row DS. So you get to choose that a little bit, whether you want to have that player in or out of serve receive. Then you have setter 2, rotation 6. Nice easy one for the setter. Again, she can. This is it's actually a highly effective rotation. Often in high school volleyball, this is an interesting rotation because when you look at the numbers between high school and NCAA, this is often on the poorer side in the NCAA because this is a second middle and it's often not a proficient slide hitter. Some NCAA teams have 2 hitters or middles are really good slide hitters, but it's not uncommon to have one that's a little less. And then their attacking options are less. Whereas in high school volleyball, the blocking is less sophisticated, and this is real easy for the setter. It's easy if the middle's hidden in front, just to go left to right there. So kind of interesting how that's a little bit different. But there you go. Okay. And we get to setter 1. Again, setter 1 just being a little bit of the oddball rotation that your outside hitter generally hits right side and your opposite, right side hitter generally hits left side. And then you have this long setter run. Because in this format, she's got to be behind that back or outside, or the front or outside is pulled into the back to pass. Setter's got to release up there. And this is another one that you need to have a plan for. If you're going to use this alignment, you need to train the release the way the setter runs up. And if you're going to push up, then maybe that opposite needs to drop back and pass, and you need to have some plans for that. Okay, so we hit, in general, kind of the basic of each rotation. But what I want to spend some time on is taking that kind of basic, most common alignments and deciding if you want to make some adjustments. The way that I like to think about it is you build out each rotation with pass, set, hit, right? That's what you do in volleyball, pass, set, hit. And I prioritize it in that order. The first thing that I always look at when I'm getting my players into their rotational alignments or setting things up is the reception. If you can't get a pass, it doesn't really matter where your setter stands because she's not going to get to the ball. And it doesn't really matter if your hitters are ready to hit. If you're shanking every ball, you're just hitting bump sets anyway. So you got to think about where your passers are going to stand. And if you look at, for example, in USA, like it's clearly in each of these rotations, the passers are kind of standing how they need to stand. And something to kind of remind is the passers get to stand wherever they need to stand to pass the ball, and everybody else has to go off them. So, for example, you look at how USA here is aligned in their setter one. I see high school and club teams. Let me put a little spotlight. Okay, so this spotlight is on this front or outside hitter who's pulled back. She's standing right where she wants to be able to stand to pass. And I often see high school teams where this outside hitter is kind of up a little further because she's kind of looking over her shoulder at a setter who's kind of right behind her. And she's like, oh, well, maybe I need to move up a little closer to the net so it's a little easier for the setter. And then she's in a worse position to pass the ball. And if you kind of notice, the setter is over here and the passer is over here. So they're kind of disassociated. Passer, and sometimes, again, in high school volleyball, they feel like they need to be joined at the hip somehow. But the passer is going to stand wherever she needs to stand to pass this ball. And in USA, I'm sure they have some kind of scouting on this server. You know, their alignment is how they want it. And then the setter is going to put herself in whatever position she needs to do to release. And those players are going to be a little separate. Those are important notes. So first of all, just standing at the right depth or at the right spot on the court. And then, if we want to tweak some of these rotations, it's really worth it to think about who is going to be able to pass the most balls. And I'm really a big fan of trying to get the libero passing at zone 6. I'm a big fan of this at any level because even at the professional, even at the elite level, zone 6 is the most common zone that's served because that's just the nature of the game. It's hard to hit the sideline. There's going to be variance towards the center of the court. And when your libero's in 6, it's easy for her to take a step to the left or take a step to the right and help out a little bit on the targeting. But it's very common. If you're coaching high school or juniors volleyball and you get the libero in 6, it's very common for them to be able to pass half of serve receives. So we'll look at how those adjustments can be made in a couple of these rotations. And then is your outside hitter is going to pass? Will your opposite pass at all? Do you DS out the opposite in the back row? And then that DS is going to pass. So if you have the capability where that right side player can pass, it gives you some nice options. So the question is she capable of doing it? So then after you get your passing all set, then you want to try to make your setter entries a little easier. If there's some ways that you can do that. Setter 4 is the hardest. Setter 1 is the next hardest. Setter 5 could be a little tricky for some kind of intermediate kind of level setters. As setters get a little bigger and faster, that one gets pretty easy for them. But you just want to make sure that you have a plan and you're also training it. And then, okay, hitters can attack the balls. They attack the best. And your hitter entries and stuff like that. That is important to train. That comes third. So after making sure that you're passing your setter taken care of, making sure they hit. All right. So now let's get into some of these. So first thing, we'll talk about setter 1. This is where you see the most variation. So we introduced it last in the slide, but we'll talk about it first in terms of adjustments. Okay, so here's an example of the setter kind of pushing that outside hitter up. And in this case, it actually was not because the setter is incapable of releasing. This is a professional team, and they play with pretty loose overlap rules. But in this case, it was because that outside hitter was being targeted in serve receive. So they're in this rotation, they're pushing her up, sliding the libero over, and then pulling that opposite back. So this kind of just this idea of pushing that hitter up so the setter can get into the release a little bit. This is a common one in club volleyball. It's in juniors volleyball. It's not a bad one. So now this is pretty easy for the setter to get right there. This outside hitter playing right side can scoot over there. One of the downsides is now your libero is over here in zone 1. And we said we like that libero to be in zone 6. So that's something to think about before you automatically do this. I do see there's quite a lot of high school and junior teams that default to pushing this outside hitter up and having this right side hitter pass. So first of all, make sure that she can pass. And then also just remember that one of these consequences, then you're pulling that libero over to zone 1. And zone 1 is the least common in high school and juniors volleyball, least commonly served zone. Zone 1 is the most common area where high school and juniors kids serve from, and players tend to serve vaguely straight ahead. So the most common serve is kind of zone 6, biasing a little over to zone 5. So just kind of keep that in mind if you want to make this trade. Something you also see in setter 1 is various forms of stacking over on the left side of the court. So one of the challenges of setter 1 is that your outside hitter, who's presumably playing outside hitter because she's good at hitting on the outside, that she's stacked over on the right side of the court. And your opposite, who's presumably playing right side hitter, opposite hitter, because she's good at hitting on the right side of the court. Now she's over on the left side of the court. So, and you train those areas a little less. They're a little less familiar with them. They're probably a little less proficient at them. So teams will try to solve that by throwing everybody over on the left side of the court. And then, okay, you got all these 3 hitters over here. And then what the heck do they do? So usually the first priority is, okay, this outside hitter is going to hit on the left side. That's why you do this stack in the whole first place. So you got all 3 front row players over there. You got all 3 back row players over here. They're still in their rotational overlap. This setter has got to be deeper than this outside. Sounds weird, but this is the outside in 2. And then this opposite has got to be ever so slightly in front of this back row outside, who's in 5. Okay, so this outside hitter, front row outside hitter, is going to hit on the left. And this is USA women. In this case, this opposite hitter is going to run all the way around the back and hit on the right side. So it's kind of a crazy move. And every now and then you'll also see a team that maybe that outside hitter will kind of be up near the net and then run along the net to try to get over to the right side team. This is a very difficult run for high school and junior kids to make. I've seen a couple teams do it. I have seen it done. It's hard because you got to cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time. So if your opposite hitter is 6'3", 6'4", dynamic athlete, they can make that move a little faster. If your opposite hitter is 5'7", and not quite as dynamic, there's a good chance they just may not be able to get all the way over to that right side of the court. And you may be fine with that. You may be getting them over there just to get them over there. And then in transition, they can hit on their right side, preferred right side of the court. In reality, you're kind of just doing it to set the left side hitter anyway. And then middle comes in and attacks the middle. And it's almost like you have 2 hitter option in serve receive, and then you'll have 3 in transition. Sometimes what you also see is this middle might run a slide, and this opposite kind of come in and hit like a quick or a 2-ball or something like that. Or sometimes even the opposite hits a slide. You'll see that stuff kind of in college volleyball. You see it in high school too. But so you may not have this opposite run all the way around. You may have this middle like go on a slide, and maybe this opposite comes in and hits a quick or a 2-ball or something at the center of the court, and then they do a little quick switch. So those are okay. Those are decent options. The thing about this is, and I like this alignment here for this USA women. It's good alignment for them. And I think it's less likely to be the solution for high school and juniors teams for a couple of reasons. We talked about that idea of going past set hit. Well, it's not an easier passing because my libero's over there in one. So I would have rather had her in six. And it's still a difficult release for the setter. So we're kind of optimizing attacking locations, which is fine as we get to these higher levels. But it's something that I wouldn't automatically just copy because you see a national team do it or a professional team do it if you're a high school or college coach. I want to make sure I would definitely consider it, but I want to make sure it's the right alignment for you before you try this one. Okay, let's go to center five. Before we get there, center six is probably your most constrained rotation. There's just with how kind of the overlaps are and where the setter needs to be. This is one of the most constrained ones, which is not bad because it's a pretty good rotation. It's an easy release for the setter. You got a libero in six, you got an outside hitting over on the left. Kind of the only thing that I think is something to sometimes think about high school, especially high school junior level. If you have this opposite, just kind of stay in the center of the court, and they can even this opposite can even kind of come stand like right there, and then just drop into the center and hit middle, and then the middle just hits right side. That's a pretty good one for high school and juniors teams. First of all, because it's like, hey, you may want your opposite to get a chance to hit a little bit in the middle, and your middle to get a chance to hit a little bit on the right side. Like that just may be good for their development as players and high school juniors volleyball. Just a little bit of novelty, a little bit of fun. Doing that just gives the other team a little bit of a different look. Like there's just some value to giving them a chance to do some different things in high school and club volleyball. And then it's a little easier entry because this middle entry can be a touch challenging to see the line of the serve, kind of wait over here and then quickly loop into the center. That can be a little challenging. Again, it's not the end of the world, but that's kind of a rotation adjustment that I mess with a little bit sometimes. But setter six is pretty stagnant. Setter five, a nice one is to have this opposite drop back and pass if this player is capable of passing. We saw in the USA example, she was pushed out. In this example, she's pulled back into serve receive. This is passing opposite. And then you can decide whether your front row outside kicks out. In this case, this front row outside is in serve receive. And here we have a back row outside kicked out. So the first thing, one of the biggest reasons to do this is this pushes your libero into zone 6. And we said that in high school and juniors volleyball, at any level of volleyball, it's valuable, but definitely high school and juniors volleyball is very valuable to push that libero in zone 6. So instead of hanging out in zone 1, now she's scooted over into zone 6. She can pass the whole center of the court. So she's going to get way more chances to pass the ball in zone 6 than zone 1. And especially if you know the other team, the server, etc., is less likely to serve zone 1. Great. Doesn't matter if that opposite's only an okay passer. Yeah, scooter back there. She's probably not going to get to pass the ball anyway. So that's good. And then you kind of decide whether you pull which of these two players passes. And I would just take the consideration to think of who's actually better at passing the ball. Because I think there's the effect of the front or outside hitter passing is a little overrated. I think a lot of teams, we got to serve the front or outside, and a lot of, we got to pull our front or outside out of serve receive. If we kind of look at it, most players don't really have their hitting affected too much by passing the ball. Just if you just look at hitting efficiency and stuff like that. I'm not saying no players. There is maybe some effect. But in this case, this player is a stronger passer than this player. So it's less concerning about whether she's in the front row or not. And in this is a professional team. They're playing with professional rule sets, which means their substitutions are limited. So they can't like BS out a back row outside. They basically, all these players have to play all the way around due to professional substitution rules. So if this is high school or juniors, and you're going to sub this player out and put in a DS, who is also a good passer. So it's another thing to kind of keep in mind. If she was a really good passer, she'd probably be the libero, not the DS. But maybe she is also a good passer. Maybe you have two players that are kind of almost equally good liberos, like one of those playing DS. You bring her in for this player in the back row. Okay, yeah. Put her in there in serve receive, scooch up this front or outside, That's fine. The setter release is like slightly more challenging when that's the case because this setter has to align with this back row outside hitter. So if this back row player was over here, then the setter would have to release from there, and you're getting a situation that's a little like setter four that's challenging. So just think about that. So my main thing is probably like just don't automatically assume that it's the front row outside hitter who would have to scooch out. Setter four, almost the same exact thing. So you see this team doing that again, back row, this time a back row opposite. This is real common. You see this a lot of times in NCAA when teams DS out their opposite. In this case, this player's not DS. She's was playing front row. Now she's playing back row, but she's a passer. She's there. And same thing, that one outside is still, back row outside is pushed out. Front row outside is still passing. For high school teams, one of the advantages of this back row outside being in the passing alignment and the front row being out of it is it actually it can make your setter release easier. Because if you kind of take these three players and you kind of smush them all together, kind of right about here, or even closer to where this blocker is standing, usually then the front row outside hitter can still bolt over here and get ready to hit outside because she doesn't have to pass. And then your setter can kind of run from here to here, which is a little easier. So it's you kind of just take these three players and you kind of clump them all up right up here near the net, and then they're wait for the serve, and then they all just kind of bolt right before, maybe even a little before the server serves. That can help you out with that rotation. And this is probably, I don't know, seems like sacrilege to say this, but some high school teams, some juniors teams, it might be okay to consider at least practicing sometimes this front row outside hitter standing over here on the right side of the court, and the setter just either getting to stand over here, and then you have no front row outside. You only have a middle and a right side attacker, and then you have sort of like a back row outside bailout, or the setter just faces the right side of the court and sets over there. Because I see in a lot of high school teams, and I guess what I'll say as a caveat is if you're having that much trouble with rotation 5-1, you might be running a 5-1 when you shouldn't be running a 5-1. But I see that. I see that with high school and juniors teams. It's not uncommon. They just have a lot of trouble with the setter being over here in rotation 4, trying to run all the way over here to get there to set. And it doesn't really matter whether they have an outside hitter or a right side hitter or not, because the setter is just struggling to get to balls and put up any kind of hittable ball. So some teams may need to do that. See, next one. Okay. Let me just show setter 3. We'll just kind of talk about setter 3. The position, where the players stand in setter 3 is often pretty common. There's not like major changes, but so some teams are going to DS this opposite. So USA is playing with an opposite who's hitting out of the back row and not receiving serve. But you may DS this opposite, and then that DS may be in zone 6, and maybe that libero slides over to zone 5, and this front row outside hitter pulls out of serve receive. So you see that with teams that only use an outside hitter who plays 3 rotations through the front row and does a passing serve receive. Okay, that can be a good option. It could be a good way for you to get a really strong attacking outside in the game without her having to pass serve receive. Does pull this libero out of zone 6, but if that's the decision you need to make, like that's a common one, you'll see that. And then the main thing is where you want this setter to stand and where you want this middle to stand. So I'm actually gonna flip over to slides. Okay. So basically you kind of do 3 things. One of the things is that middle can just start on the right side of the court and hit a right side ball. I think it's kind of an underrated, sorry. Hey, where did I go? Sorry. There we go. Okay, sorry. So there you go. So just having this middle stand right over here and hit a right side ball is a pretty good option. You still have an option on the left side and an option on the right side. You're still spreading the net. You have a front row setter, so she's an attacking option in more of the center of the court. So you're still really kind of spreading the other team out and giving them the whole net to deal with. And it's not a bad option. And it's really easy. It's easy to set. It's easy for them to get into the rotations. The middle doesn't need to loop around to the center of the court. And if she's a pretty good hitter on the right side, it's a pretty good option. And then the other option is, okay, she's going to stand over there, loop into the center of the court to hit middle. That's good. And then the last option is the setter in the middle, like this setter will come kind of over here. And this middle will come over here too. So they're kind of all standing, not all on the left side of the court, but kind of center to left of center. And then that middle will drop back and hit a slide. So sometimes if you want that middle to hit a slide, it's a little easier if they can start from closer to the center of the court and go around. In this case with USA, she is going to hit a slide, and she's just going to kind of go from here and then come a little more into the center and then back out to hit a slide, which is also totally fine. There's a few different ways to do it. But it's kind of the point of that little adjustment. You kind of have three varieties depending on what you want that player to do, what you want that middle player to do, whether she's going to hit the center of the court, whether she's going to hit on the right side of the court, and whether she's going to hit the right side of the court kind of straight on or with a slide approach. And here's a little bit of a funky one. In setter 2, if you want to get that libero in zone 6, you have to libero out the opposite and leave a middle in the back row. So this is one of the only ways. Setter 2 is the hardest rotation to get your libero in zone 6. So let's backtrack again a little bit. I feel like I'm just getting people dizzy with these slides. Here's setter 1. Libero by default is in zone 6. In setter 6, libero by default is in there. Setter 5 and setter 4, she's in zone 1. But we talked about you have this setter 5 adjustment and this setter 4 adjustment where the libero can be in zone 6. And then we have setter 3. Libero by default is in zone 6. So there's 5 of 6 where it's pretty easy to get the libero at 6. Now setter 2 is the hard one. So the only two ways that you could do it would be, one, by not having an outside hitter, basically pulling that from outside hitter over to the right side of the court, which would then shift that libero into the center. So that actually is an option. But then you lose an outside hitter. You only have a middle and a right side hitter. So that's usually not a great option. I think an option that some juniors teams should think about is when that middle or whoever serves for that middle, if you sub out your middle to serve or whatever like that with various rules, that middle serves, not having the libero come in for her, but having that libero come in for the opposite, because then she can stand in zone 6 to pass. And then you got, if your libero is your best receiver, which would be common, now you got that libero passing right there. And then this middle is probably pulled out a serve receive, maybe not, but probably. And then if you need a back row hitter, she actually can hit out of the back row. So in this particular play, that's what this team is going to do. This libero's here. This middle's pulled out a serve receive. She's going to hit out of the back row. And they can do that. So that's a little bit of a funky modification there. But for some teams, that could be worth doing. And the last thing that we talked about was the setter 3, the setter 6 adjustments. And then, that's those are all the specifics. And let me just kind of come back to kind of the principles for how we're making those decisions. Use that pass, set, hit thought. Get your best passers passing the most balls and standing wherever they need to stand to pass the ball. And then get your setter entry in the right spot. And then if you can optimize the hitters, you can optimize the hitters. But you got to be able to pass. You got to be able to set. And then usually the hitter entries, the hitters can get where they need to get, I find. All right. So thank you for coming out to this. And if anybody has any questions or wants to follow up on this, you can reach out to me via email or kind of via the various USA Volleyball channels. I'm always happy to take your questions. Always love to hear some feedback. And appreciate everybody taking the time to watch this seminar.